Today's story is about a guy who did the right thing and got completely leveled for it. He caught his stepmom cheating, gave her a fair ultimatum, and she thanked him by framing him to his own father. With real texts she'd twisted out of context, a cover story she'd clearly rehearsed, and a level of premeditated calm that'll make you genuinely uncomfortable. His dad bought every word, blocked his number, sent a letter calling him a bad influence on the family. 6 months of complete silence. But here's the thing about recording someone's confession in a one-party consent state. That audio doesn't expire. And this guy had a copy the whole time. Pull up a seat. My stepmom framed me to cover her own affair. My dad believed her, blocked my number, and called me a bad influence. 6 months later, he came crawling back. I had the recording the whole time. I'm 29 and the last 8 months of my life have been a genuine disaster, so I figured I'd put this on Reddit and see what people think. Gonna be a long one. Bear with me. Quick background first. My mom passed away when I was 14. Breast cancer. One of those things that splits your life into a before and an after, and the after version takes years to figure out. There's no good version of being 14 and losing a parent, but losing your mom specifically does something to how you move through the rest of your life. You carry this quiet awareness that the thing you thought was permanent turned out not to be, and it changes how you hold on to things. My dad and I leaned hard on each other during that stretch. Probably harder than was healthy for either of us, honestly. But it worked. It was just the two of us for a while, rattling around a house that suddenly felt way too big and way too quiet. He coached my baseball team even though he barely knew the rules, which I only appreciated years later. I sat through every single one of his Saturday Western marathons without saying a word. We figured it out together. When I was 17, he started dating someone. Her name was Diane. Around his age, seemed decent. Had 2 kids from a previous relationship, a son named Liam and a daughter named Nina. And she seemed fine when I first met her. I wasn't looking for problems. My dad had spent 3 years just grinding through grief, and now he seemed lighter around her, laughing more, less tired around the eyes. Whatever quiet reservations I had, I kept them to myself. He deserved to be happy again. That much I knew. A few years after that, back home during a college summer, they moved in together, and not long after that they got married. I remember standing at that wedding genuinely feeling good about it. Not just going through the motions, actually happy for him. Diane brought out a version of my dad I'd missed. He seemed like himself again. I wasn't about to overthink it. Over the years, I kept things civil with Diane and her kids. Liam and Nina were younger than me, different life stages, and we didn't really bond beyond the basics. No tension, just not close. I went through law school, landed a position at a firm about an hour from my dad's place, got an apartment, built a life. Even after I moved out for good, I kept up the every other weekend visits. Drive over Friday evening, have dinner, catch up, drive back Saturday morning. It became a routine, a comfortable one. From the outside, everything looked stable. My dad seemed content. The house felt fine. I had no reason to think otherwise. 8 months ago, that changed. I went over for a regular Friday visit and Diane was acting strange. Phone constantly in her hand, grinning at whatever was on the screen, then quick as anything flipping it face down the second anyone walked near her. I noticed it and let it go. People get weird about their phones. I wasn't trying to find problems where there weren't any. But later that evening, I walked into the kitchen to grab some water, and she was mid-conversation in there. Voice low, warm in a very specific way. I didn't hear the whole thing, just enough. Flirtatious, comfortable, the kind of tone you use with someone you've been talking to for a long time. Not a coworker, not a family member. My stomach turned. She didn't see me. I backed out and said nothing for the rest of the evening. Then, while I was grabbing something from the garage before heading home, Diane appeared in the doorway behind me. That's when she admitted it. She'd been seeing her gym trainer, said it was a phase, said she was working through some personal stuff. The explanation was almost impressively vague. What wasn't vague was how she looked. Not remorseful, just scared. Not sorry she'd done it. Sorry she'd been spotted. There's a difference between guilt and damage control, and this was definitely damage control wearing guilt's clothes. She begged me not to tell my dad. Said she still loved him. Said the whole thing was basically already over and she'd handle it. I told her she had 1 week to come clean to him herself. If she didn't, I'd do it. And before she even started talking, instinct more than strategy, I'd hit record on my phone. One-party consent state. The whole conversation is on audio. Her admitting the affair, naming the trainer, begging me to stay quiet. Every word of it clean and clear. I drove home that night feeling genuinely sick. Hold on. For the listeners, this is me jumping in, not the OP. She corners him in the garage and asks him to keep her secret. Let me be real about what actually happened there. She didn't confess because she felt guilty. She confessed because she needed a co-conspirator before she lost control of the situation. There's a name for someone who operates at that level of cool-headed self-interest. I'm calling her the damage control specialist. Most people panic when they get caught. She pivoted. That's not remorse. That's risk management wearing a sad face. And the fact that she was this calm about it, not a first offense. It gets much worse. I went back roughly 10 days later. She'd asked for a couple extra days and I'd given them, half expecting some kind of awkward resolution. Either she'd told him, or I'd pull him aside and do it myself. What I walked into instead was my dad sitting at the kitchen table looking like someone who hadn't slept since I'd left. He barely made eye contact when I came in. The warmth that had been at every single one of these visits for years was just completely gone. We got a moment alone. He told me he already knew about the affair. My first reaction was honest relief. I thought she'd done it. Actually come clean on her own. Then he told me he believed I'd known about it for months. I just stared at him. The words took a second to register. Not just that he thought I'd known. He thought I'd been actively helping her cover it up. Diane had gotten to him first. Her version, she'd confided in me months ago, and instead of telling my dad, I'd agreed to help her. Gave her cover stories when she needed them, made excuses on her behalf, kept him in the dark on purpose. She'd backed it up with texts, real ones, from me to her. The problem was that every single one of them was completely normal stuff. Checking if she was home before I stopped by, asking to borrow a folding table once, confirming timing for a family thing. Mundane. But arranged a certain way, out of context, they looked like coordination. Like I was her point person. I tried to explain. Told him when I'd actually found out. Showed him my phone. He wouldn't look at it. Said he needed space and time. And that was where the conversation ended. I drove home that night trying to understand how this was my life now. Wait. For those just tuning in, I'm the host, not the OP. She didn't just cheat, she preloaded a cover story and detonated it before he could get a single word in. That's Gone Girl level operational planning. She took actual, real, completely boring text messages and reverse engineered them into evidence. That's not panic, that's preparation. His dad got played by someone who'd been running this exact playbook long enough to have it memorized. And the recording exists, the whole time. His dad is out here about to block his number, while the receipt is just sitting on that phone, waiting. I love this channel. Anyway, the email is next. About a week after that visit, an email arrived from my dad. He and Diane had decided to work on their marriage. Part of that process, he wrote, meant removing what he called negative influences. I was apparently one of those. He said I was a bad influence specifically on Liam and Nina, the kids, and that he couldn't trust me around the family anymore. Maybe someday we could try to rebuild, he said, but for now he was choosing them. I read that email a few times. Each read landed differently and none of them landed well. This was the same man who'd driven an hour out of his way to drop off food during my law school finals, because I'd mentioned offhand that I hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. The same guy I'd watched cry exactly once in my life, the week after my mom's funeral, when he thought I was asleep. And now, on the word of a woman he'd known a handful of years versus his own son, he was calling me toxic and closing the door. I tried everything I could think of after that. Called his number until messages stopped delivering. Texted until the read receipts disappeared. Wrote actual handwritten letters and mailed them to the house, which is embarrassing to admit in 2024, but I was running out of options. Every email I sent had the garage recording attached. Her voice, her admission, her asking me to keep quiet, the whole thing. 30 seconds would have been enough to blow the whole story apart. He deleted the emails without opening them, returned the letters unopened, eventually blocked my number completely. 6 months of nothing, just silence. I want to be honest about what those 6 months actually felt like, because it wasn't just sad. It was disorienting in a way I wasn't prepared for. I'd go into work and sit through a full day of cases, and then drive home and realize I'd been operating on autopilot the entire time. I'd pick up my phone to tell my dad something dumb that happened at the office, then remember. I'd catch a Western playing on TV and just shut it off. There were a few nights where I sat down to write another letter I already knew was going to come back unopened, stared at the paper for 20 minutes, and then folded it up and threw it away. That's what grief that has nowhere to go looks like. You just keep starting things you can't finish. I threw myself into work, started running again, mostly to have somewhere to put the energy. I reconnected with my mom's parents, my grandparents, who I hadn't really been close with since my dad had started his new chapter with Diane. He'd kind of drifted from them after the remarriage, and I'd followed his lead without thinking much about it. When I reached out, they took me back without making it a whole thing. Their house felt familiar in a specific way I'd almost forgotten. There's a photo of my mom on their kitchen wall, one I'd seen 100 times growing up. First night I was back there, I stood in front of it for longer than was probably normal, not looking for anything, just looking. Anyway, Melissa, my girlfriend, was steady through all of it. She listened when I needed to talk and pushed back when I started spiraling into maybe I'm actually the problem territory, which happened more than I'd like to admit. 6 months of someone you love treating you like you don't exist will do something to how you see yourself, even when you know logically that you didn't do a single thing wrong. Yo, timeout. Host here. That walkout he's about to make, fully earned. His dad spent 6 months choosing a woman who was sleeping with his best friend and his own brother, over his actual kid. Blocked the number, returned the letters unopened, called him a bad influence in writing, never opened a single email, and now he's calling from an unknown number, asking for a support system. Pay attention to what the OP does with that recording at the coffee shop. That's the whole story right there. But also, what Liam found on that iPad is still coming, and it gets dark before it gets good. 3 days ago, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. I don't know what. It was my dad. His voice was different from any version of it I could remember. Hollow in a way that goes past tired, like someone running on nothing for a long time. He asked if we could meet. Said he had to talk about something. I agreed, honestly, more curious than anything else at that point. We met at a coffee shop roughly halfway between our places. When I saw him walk in, it actually stopped me for a second. He'd lost real weight, deep circles under his eyes. His shoulders were dropped in a way I'd genuinely never seen on him, not even the weeks right after my mom died. He looked like a man who'd had years of something wrong and had only just realized it. He opened with an apology, said he should have trusted me, should have opened even one of the emails, should have listened when I tried to explain at that kitchen table. Then he told me everything. Diane hadn't just been seeing the gym trainer. She'd been cheating on him for years, multiple people. His best friend Tony, his brother Mark, my actual uncle. That last one hit him differently than the rest. You could hear it in how he said it. The whole thing came out because Liam had picked up Diane's iPad to work on a school project, and notifications started coming through. He'd seen his uncle's name, gotten curious, and the whole thing collapsed in front of him. 2 years of explicit messages with Mark, similar exchanges with Tony, at least 2 other men, and there was one specific text Liam had shown my dad. A message Diane had sent to Mark right around the time she'd framed me. Paraphrasing, she said I'd almost caught them. She'd had to throw me under the bus with my dad, and that he'd believed her over me, that I wouldn't be a problem anymore. Calm, casual, like she was confirming a lunch reservation. My dad sat across from me telling me all of this, and I could tell he was waiting for some kind of big reaction. What he got was this weird, hollow laugh I didn't know I had in me. Not amused, the sound your body makes when the confirmation of what you already suspected finally shows up, except it's 6 months too late to fix the damage it caused. He said he was divorcing her, said he needed help finding a good attorney, said he needed support getting through it, said he missed me. I let him finish. Then I went through it all. I reminded him of his email. The exact phrasing, bad influence, negative presence, the kids were better off without me around. I reminded him that he hadn't just doubted me in a moment of confusion. He'd made a deliberate, sustained choice. Blocked the number. Sent back the letters. Deleted every single email without opening one. That's not someone who got confused. That's someone who decided. He'd looked at 6 months of silence between him and his own kid and chosen to leave it that way, every single day. And now, only after Diane had finished burning every other bridge she'd ever given him, he'd circled back to the one person who'd tried to warn him before any of this started. I let that sit there between us for a second. Then I told him I'd had the recording the whole time. His face changed. I watched it happen. Not guilt exactly, something closer to the specific kind of sick you feel when you realize the thing you could have known, you actually could have known all along. I pulled out my phone and played the first 30 seconds. Her voice, her admission, her asking me to keep quiet. I let it run just long enough for it to be completely undeniable. Then I stopped it. He started to say something. I didn't let him get there. I told him I wasn't helping him find a lawyer. I wasn't going to hold his hand through the divorce. Because when I was the one being lied about and thrown out, he hadn't been there. Not even a little. So now he was on his own. Exactly the same as I'd been. Then I walked out, went home and sat with the whole pile of it. Part of me felt like I'd finally said the thing I'd been carrying for 6 months and could now put it down. Another part of me kept coming back to the fact that he's still my dad. Still the guy who showed up to every single one of my baseball games even though he couldn't have told you the infield fly rule at gunpoint. I didn't know if I'd done the right thing or if I'd just let 6 months of pain do all my talking for me. So I posted it. Apparently a lot of people had thoughts. Final update. I didn't expect the post to blow up the way it did. Melissa read through the comments with me and made a pretty straightforward point. People do terrible things when they're being manipulated by someone they love. She wasn't saying I was wrong to walk out. She was just saying it was worth sitting with before I made anything permanent. We talked late into the night and she was right. I hadn't fully closed the door, and maybe I didn't need to. The next morning I had a stack of missed calls from my dad. I let them sit. Then I got a text from Nina. Hadn't heard from her in months, and she's only 16, so that was unexpected. Her message was short, but it shifted something. She said both she and Liam had known I'd been unfairly pushed out. They'd overheard arguments between their mom and my dad about me, and neither of them had ever believed I would help someone cheat. Diane had told them they weren't allowed to contact me. My dad had enforced it, but now that everything was falling apart, she needed me to know where they'd stood all along. She also told me what home looked like right then. Diane was denying everything, even with the messages sitting right there in front of her. My dad was at a hotel. Diane was making noise about taking the kids and moving back to her hometown. I called Nina back. We ended up talking for about an hour. She's 16, but she doesn't sound like it. There's a specific kind of maturity that develops when you grow up watching adults fail consistently. She said her mom had always been this way, even before my dad, even in their previous family. Manipulative, always the victim in her own version of events, always someone else's fault. She said sorry for not standing up for me earlier. She'd been scared of what her mom would do. After that call, I called my dad back. Tense at first, him apologizing, me not making it easy. Then he just completely broke down. Not a controlled emotional moment staged for effect, but the real thing, the kind where someone stops holding it together entirely. He said that somewhere in the back of his head, he'd probably always known I was telling the truth. But he'd been so determined to hold the marriage together that he'd chosen Diane's version, because questioning it would mean questioning everything. Losing my mom had done something to him he'd never fully worked through. He said he couldn't face the thought of another failed relationship, another loss. So when Diane handed him a version of events that put the blame somewhere else, he grabbed it. He also told me something I hadn't known. Diane had threatened to take Liam and Nina if he didn't cut ties with me. Told him I was poisoning the family, that the kids were uncomfortable around me, that I was trying to destroy their marriage out of jealousy. Nina had already told me that was a lie. He admitted he'd known, on some level, it was a lie. He'd been too scared to call it. I told him I needed more time before I could make any decisions, but I agreed to meet him again. The second meeting, he showed up with Liam. I hadn't been around Liam much. We'd never had the kind of relationship where you just hang out. So seeing him walk in alongside my dad was strange, in a way I didn't expect. He's 17, looks a lot like his mom actually, which I had to consciously not hold against him. He sat down across from me and looked like someone who'd been rehearsing what he was about to say for a few days, which I respected. He didn't hedge, just walked me through the whole thing. He'd been using Diane's iPad for a school project, some kind of presentation that needed a bigger screen, when her phone notifications started syncing through. He'd ignored the first few. Then he saw his Uncle Mark's name come up with some emojis that made him look twice. He opened the thread expecting something explainable. He did not find something explainable. 2 years of explicit messages with Mark. Similar exchanges with Tony, his dad's closest friend since college. At least 2 other men. Liam said he'd sat there for about 20 minutes just reading, not sure what he was supposed to do with any of it. Then he'd screenshotted everything, made an email draft with it all attached, and walked it straight to my dad. And then there was the text, the one Diane had sent to Mark right around the time she'd framed me. Liam had it on his phone. He'd saved it separately. He handed the phone across the table and I read it. She said I'd almost caught them that day. Said she'd had to throw me under the bus with my dad. Said he'd believed her over me and that I wouldn't be a problem anymore. No emotion in it. No hesitation. Just handled it. Moving on. I felt physically sick reading it. There's knowing something, and then there's seeing it in her own words, calm and matter of fact. And those are two completely different experiences. Pause for a second. Host here, not the OP. She wrote that text to her side guy while she was in the middle of dismantling her own stepson's relationship with his father. Casual, unbothered, like she was updating a to-do list. I need you to sit with what it takes to operate that way. She had a husband, a best friend, a brother-in-law, and at least 2 other guys all going simultaneously, while keeping her stepson framed, while keeping her husband isolated, while keeping her kids in line. That's not chaos. That's a project. I'm going to call her the one-woman demolition crew. And we haven't even gotten to the money yet. Don't go anywhere. My dad stared at the table through most of Liam's explanation. When Liam stepped out, my dad reached into his bag and handed me a small journal. He said he'd been writing letters to me every week for 6 months. Letters he never sent. Said I could read it or throw it away. Entirely my choice, no pressure, nothing asked in return. I didn't say anything. I put it in my bag. Then Liam came back and told me the rest. Diane had been moving money out of my dad's accounts for years. Small automatic transfers, nothing big enough to raise a flag in any given month, into a private account in her name. Over 8 years. Nearly $300,000. His retirement savings were mostly gone. There was a second mortgage on the house that he'd known nothing about. She'd opened multiple credit cards in his name. His credit was wrecked. My dad had bank statements with him. He'd already confirmed it all before the meeting. He looked defeated in a way that's hard to put into words. Not angry, just completely emptied out. Like the floor had fallen away in slow motion, and he'd only just noticed he was already falling. As a lawyer, I know exactly what those offenses are. This wasn't just a bad marriage. This was years of financial fraud with a clear paper trail. I told him to file a report with law enforcement that same day and to get everything in front of his divorce attorney immediately. And something shifted in me right then. Not forgiveness, not yet. More like the protective instinct coming back online. He'd made a terrible call when he chose Diane's story over mine. But he'd also been systematically dismantled by someone who'd been doing this a long time. I ended up offering to review his legal documents. I connected him with a colleague from law school who handles financial crime cases. Hold on. Host talking, $300,000, 8 years, small transfers, consistent, nothing that'd trip an alarm in any given month. That's not impulse. That's a long con with a budget and a timeline. She ran the emotional manipulation, the affair network, the isolation strategy, the identity theft, and the account draining, all from the same house, while making the one person who figured it out look like the threat. If running a family into the ground was an Olympic sport, she'd test positive for performance enhancers. And then she took out the life insurance policy. I don't need to say what I think about that. You already thought it. We parted that day better than we'd been at any point since this whole thing started. That night, everything moved fast. Nina called me, barely holding together. Diane had found out that Liam had shared the evidence with my dad. She'd lost it completely. Destroyed Liam's laptop, smashed his phone, tore through the house, then stormed out. Nina was alone, scared she'd come back in the same state. I grabbed Melissa and we drove over. The drive was about 25 minutes, and I spent most of it just trying to stay calm. I'd been a lawyer long enough to know that when someone acts like Diane had been acting, they don't go quietly. The smarter they've been operating, the more damage they do on the way out. The house was a wreck. Drawers emptied, files strewn everywhere. The safe in my dad's home office sitting open and completely cleaned out. Passports, birth certificates, social security cards, all of it gone. There were 2 broken picture frames on the hallway floor. I stepped around them. Melissa found Nina in her room with the door locked, sitting on the floor with her back against the bed. She looked exhausted in the way you look after you've been waiting for something terrible for a long time, and it finally just happened. Melissa sat down next to her. I called Liam. He'd left right after the blow-up and was at a friend's house. Then called my dad at the hotel and told him to get home. He arrived and immediately called the police to report the property damage and document theft. While he was dealing with the officers, my phone buzzed from an unknown number. Diane. The message said if my dad wanted his documents back, he'd withdraw the divorce filing and sign the house over to her. Otherwise, his credit score wasn't going to be the only thing she destroyed. I walked the phone straight over to the officers. They classified it as extortion on the spot. Within a few hours, there were warrants out: extortion, destruction of property, theft of identifying documents. The following morning, she'd emptied their joint checking account, around $15,000, before going off the grid. She'd also tried to pull from his retirement account, but couldn't, because he'd frozen it on my advice the day before. She was arrested that evening. Then, while helping my dad sort through recovered paperwork for the legal proceedings, I found one more thing buried in the stack: a life insurance policy Diane had taken out on my dad 3 months ago. $2 million. Her as sole beneficiary. Short contestability period. Accidental death covered from day one. I'm not going to write out what I think that means. We reported it to the authorities, and they're treating it accordingly. My dad has been staying at my apartment since then. Liam and Nina too for now, while things settle. It's loud and honestly not something I had planned for my life at 29. My apartment was set up for 2 people, me, Melissa, and a reasonable amount of quiet. Now there's a 17-year-old on the pullout and a 16-year-old who apparently wakes up at 6 in the morning and immediately wants to make eggs. It's a lot. 2 nights ago, Melissa made a big pot of pasta, and we all sat around the table together. Nina laughed at something Liam said. I don't even remember what it was, something dumb. And it was so genuinely normal that it caught me off guard. Like, for about 45 seconds, the entire pile of everything from the last 8 months just wasn't the main thing happening. That was the main thing. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just kept eating. I don't know what the road from here looks like. There's still a mountain of legal proceedings ahead. The financial damage is real, and it'll take years to fully work through. And rebuilding a relationship that took a direct hit like this doesn't happen over a few shared dinners. I read the journal my dad gave me. Some of it was hard to get through. There's an entry from about 2 months ago where he wrote about driving past my apartment building because he missed me, but sitting in his car, too ashamed to knock on my door. He just sat there for a while and then drove home. Said he did that twice. I had no idea. I read that one a few times. I don't know if I'll fully forgive him for choosing wrong when it mattered most. Maybe I will. Maybe it takes longer than a few weeks of pasta dinners and awkward mornings to get there, and that's probably fine. We're talking again. We're in the same room without it being completely miserable. For now, that's what it is. That's enough to keep going with. I'll update if anything significant changes. So, Reddit, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have kept the door closed, or would you have walked back toward him? Look, this story isn't about a guy forgiving his dad and everything snapping back to normal. It's about a woman who spent years treating a family like a resource to drain, and nearly got away with it because she was genuinely good at it. She isolated the dad, framed the stepson, stole the savings, and apparently wasn't done there. The OP held on to that recording for 6 months while his own father treated him like garbage. Didn't wave it around, didn't beg, just waited. And when the moment came, he let it do exactly what it needed to. Drop a comment. Would you have walked out of that coffee shop? Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.